This session's going to try to provide you an opportunity to learn from traditional tool experts with a focus on learning how to use a tool rather than just learning the how-to technique to do it. Talk about some foundational teaching by these experts, where we're putting more emphasis on the science, the physics, and the dynamics of the work, and the proper shape, size, and balance of the tool. This understanding improves efficiency and safety of the tool. Even if you're new or whether you have years of experience, this is going to help you. There is nothing easy about using traditional tools. It's hard work, but improving proficiency of tool use enhances the experience, and it promotes the recognition of value in the work of the tools that we do use in wilderness. So for our discussion on traditional tools, let's start it off with Bob as he provides some insights and direction into the traditional tool disciplines. Go ahead, Bob.
Thanks, Carol. My name is Bob Beckley. I retired from the U.S. Forest Service Technology and Development Program in Missoula, where the main focus of my work was in traditional skills. It's not just the main focus of my work, but it was the passion of my work. Even though I'm retired now, I'm still active. I still consider myself a Forest Service employee. I volunteer with the agency. I continue to write and research and teach traditional skills. And I'm also on the board of directors for the Selway, Bitterroot, Frank Church Wilderness Foundation, National Smoke Jumper Association, and do a little bit of work with the Museum of Forest Service History. So it does give me a little bit of opportunity to still get out in the woods and practice what I've been preaching for so many years. In today's workshop, we're not going to be teaching technique. Learning the actual technique takes hands-on skill, hands-on training. What we want to do in today's session is to try to give you some information about the very different traditional skills we have, and hopefully spark your interest into furthering your knowledge and learning about some of these skills. So to start off, let's talk about definitions. The term primitive skills and traditional skills are often used in the same breath. People think they're the same. They're actually quite different. A primitive skill is actually a Stone Age skill. When we talk about traditional skills, it's actually a complex thought process involving physics. It's a lot more detailed, a lot more oriented than a primitive skill. So in addition to that thought process, we also have to look at the type of tools we use. So looking at the mainstay, which is a crosscut saw and an axe, these are not primitive tools. If you look at the shape of the modern crosscut saw, and by modern crosscut saw, we're talking back into the 1800s, that saw is actually biomechanically engineered, biomechanically designed to mimic your body's movements when you're using that saw. The modern axe, and by modern axe, I'm talking mid-late 1700s, when the European axe came over to America, so around the time of the American Revolution, the shape and design of the axe has changed to actually be, to better fit the chopping and type of work we do. So these tools are actually state-of-the-art tools. There really isn't much better than what we have there. Let's look at some of the more common traditional skills that we talk about. So we've mentioned crosscut saws, we've mentioned axes. There's also blasting and explosives, non-motorized rigging, and horses, mules, and packing. Basically, it could be almost anything that doesn't have a motor or a computer attached to it. I think one of the things that always intrigued me about traditional skills and what really got me interested in it is it's a thought process. You know, one of the greatest benefits of learning a traditional skill is it teaches us how to think. It teaches us problem-solving skills. There is not a computer program, there's not an app to do the work we do. We have to think about it, understand and comprehend what we're about to get into. Now, I'm sure a lot of you out there are looking and thinking, oh, I bet I can design an app or a program to do this. I don't think so. You might be able to design an app or a program to talk about the work, but every rock you move, every tree you cut, every log you move off a trail, there are different nuances. The physics are all different. And a good part of what we're looking at are physics. So traditional skills is that it encourages us to think, it's that thought process. In teaching these skills, over the years, well over 30 plus years of teaching it, I've probably taught thousands of people. And everybody wants to advance in their skill set. Everybody wants to be the best they can be. If you're an A sawyer, you want to be a B. If you're a B, you want to be a C. If you're a C, you want to be a C qualifier. What's it take to be a traditional skill master? And this is important. What it takes is you have to master the basics. When we look at injury and accident rates, most of the accidents get hurt are because somebody doesn't follow the basics. They don't follow those foundational principles, and that's what gets them into trouble. Learning the basics is what makes you a master at these skills. Every project is different. Every project has something to teach us. If we learn from every project founded on those basic principles, that's what will make you the master. I think one of the things that also plays deep into this is really our DNA. And I'm going to use the crosscut saw as an example. Crosscut saw and chainsaw. Over the years of doing this training and this teaching, we've noticed that if we train people on a crosscut saw, whether they will ever use that saw again, we wind up with better and safer sawyers. The reason for that is we're all hardwired to not expend any more energy than we need to get the task done. If you have a motor on your saw, you can make mistakes, and that motor will allow you to power through your mistake or correct your mistakes without expending too much more of your own energy. On the other hand, when you put somebody on a crosscut saw, they only want to cut that log once. They do a much better job intuitively of looking for bind, for tension, for compression, for lean. They only want to cut it once. They wind up doing that right. Another thing that we've noticed, some years ago, there was a large blowdown in the Boundary Waters canoe area. We had a chance to look at crosscut sawyers and chainsaw sawyers working side by side. It was an impromptu, non-scientific study. And at the end of the day, crosscut sawyers came in, or chainsaw sawyers came in quicker, but not by much. Chainsaw, it's hard. More energy, more expenditure, exhaust, noise, vibration. Crosscut sawyers actually came in better, stronger, healthier. I'm running out of time here. I'm not even anywhere near close to being what I wanted to say. But when we talk about traditional skills, when I do my teachings, I often refer to learning a traditional skill as a dance. And the tool you're going to be using is your dance partner. So what we're talking about is nuance, movement, senses, all those things coming together. You're not going to be looking at ballroom dancing across the forest floor with your crosscut saw. We're not talking about anything easy here. The work we do is often hard and often dangerous, and learning these skills is paramount to your safety. While you may be able to adjust the physics of whatever you're doing to make it work better and easier for you to accomplish the task, you're not altering the laws of physics. And ladies and gentlemen, the laws of physics are non-negotiable. So with that, I think I'm probably running out of time. Like I said, I have a lot more to say. And in closing, the people you'll be hearing from today are my friends, my tutors, my mentors. I consider them family. We're a small, tight-knit group. If you have an interest in what we're doing, come learn a skill. We'd love to have you part of our family. With that, I'll turn it back to Carol.
Thanks, Bob. That sounded great. What a great intro. So right now, in order to make it a little bit more field-like, we're going to go ahead and run just a short 2-minute video from a physical therapist that's going to show us how important all the muscle groups are to run these tools, because you don't just have to be strong. It's not just the technique. Remember, it's the actual, as Bob said, the dance.
We'll begin a full body warm up, starting with the arms. This first one is some small circles aimed at warming up the rotator cuff and the upper back a little bit. You'll go in each direction. Then you'll make some bigger circles going forward. Then switching direction going back. For each of these movements, maybe going 5 to 10 times would be fine. Kind of feel what feels best for you. The next movement, going into a twist. So arms are just hanging at your side, feet are hip width apart, just letting your body spin right and then the left. Next, we're going into a side bend. So you want to reach up and then over, stretching out the side of your body, and again, continuing to warm up the shoulders. Then we're going to warm up the spine a little bit more with some flexion and extension. Reaching forward, you're going to interlace your fingers and sort of press your arms forward. Then as you look up, you're going to support your head with your hands, reaching your elbows wide to stretch out your chest and your upper back. Then we're going to move into the legs. First one here being just a little knee hug. So you're standing and grabbing one knee, pulling up to your chest. Again, maybe doing 5 to 10 on each side, whatever feels good for your body. This exercise I call a hurdle step. So you are reaching your knee and your foot kind of up and over as if there was a hurdle you're trying to go over. This is stretching out the hips and warming up the leg muscles. Again, staying with the hips here, we're going to just have feet hip width apart. You're going to sway your hips side to side. At first, imagining that you're hinging right at your pockets where my hands are in this video. Then you'll move into a deeper kind of side lunge. Again, working to warm up the legs and the hips.
We're warmed up. We're ready, Dolly. Go ahead and tell us about your years of experience and describe the best ways to work with a crosscut saw.
Okay, great. Well, I am honored. And, you know, there's no training session or curriculum that can duplicate the rich traditions by which working people have learned the skills to use crosscut saws and other hand tools. But we have pulled a huge number of us together here. And again, I'm just excited to be able to share a little bit about them. When we talk about crosscut saws, we generalize and divide them into categories. We talk about bucking saws versus felling saws, or we talk about one-man saws versus two-man saws. I prefer to call the one-man saw a D-handle saw because of the D-shaped wooden handle on the big end. Back to felling and bucking saws. You know, a felling saw has to be more flexible and have a curved back to better match the human body's motion in that activity. A bucking saw needs to be heavier and stiffer, generally a straight back. But beyond those two categories, there was a huge variety of saws made, a lot of them hybrids, a lot of them felling saws that work really well for trail crews to buck out the small diameter trees that we are often clearing off of trails. So categorizing and generalizing is good for learning, but it doesn't really explain all the variety of saws that we have out there. Other characteristics of saws, aside from their general silhouette or profile, I'd say, are, well, most fascinating is the grind. A good quality crosscut saw was made with the metal at the teeth being thicker than the metal as you get farther from the teeth towards the back. I normally have a saw in my hands to point and explain this. But the idea is that a good saw would automatically cut a kerf a little bit wider than the thickness of the body of the saw, reducing friction. The grinding process to make those old saws concentric taper ground was very well thought out, and it often ground away 15% of the metal. We don't have new saws being produced to that quality. Other characteristics of different saws are the arc. The best saws were made on a true arc, which is a segment of a circle. And the radius of those circles varied from 20 to 30 feet. And some people prefer a saw with a tighter arc, a smaller radius. Some people prefer one with a longer arc. And you know, the fun thing about saws is when you start thinking about all these differences, suddenly you say, well, I know why they did that. Other differences in saws are the tooth patterns. Generally, I can break them down into tooth patterns that have raker teeth and cutter teeth versus tooth patterns that have raker cutter teeth that have to do both jobs at once. We have, well, our curriculum describes the 3 or 4 most common tooth patterns, but there were variations on each of those. And the pitch varied. The pitch is also known as the number of teeth per inch or teeth per foot on a crosscut saw. And the closer together the teeth are, the more teeth per foot, the smoother that saw is going to run. Some people prefer that over a saw with wider space teeth that might cut faster. We're all going to have different personal preferences on crosscut saws. Other differences, some saws are more flexible than others. Length of saw is critical. Some people want a small, short, lightweight saw to carry. Other people want a big saw where the weight's going to do the job itself. I like a saw that allows me to use my full range of motion in my body. So I'll carry around a 6-foot saw when a lot of people say, well, a 4.5 would take care of it for us. The neat thing about saws is there's so many different models and designs, and behind every design was someone who thought they were finally designing the absolute best crosscut saw. And they were right. They were designing the one they wanted. And each of you will have a favorite, and you're all correct. One big difference in saws, though, if the saw has not been tuned and sharpened correctly, or if it has been tuned and sharpened with somebody who perhaps didn't have the right tools, even the best crosscut saw is just not going to work well. On the other hand, even fairly poorly quality saws, if they are tuned and sharpened well, they will serve pretty well. Anybody can sharpen a saw. It's not rocket science, but it takes attention to detail. It takes enthusiasm. It takes practice. It takes the right tools, which varies. There are different ways to do it. There's more than one way to go about it. But when I'm teaching people to sharpen saws, I do point out that it's that last 10% of precision in the sharpening work that accounts for about 70% of the performance of a saw. We're measuring those tolerances between rakers and cutters and the tolerances of the set in thousandths of an inch. And if you're off a few thousandths, you're going to notice. So that's an introduction to the saws. There's so many accessories that go with saws, but the one I have to talk about is the handle. On any traditional tool, any hand tool, the handle is the lever that connects your body to that tool. And on crosscut saws, the handle placement, higher or lower in the 2 holes at the end of the saw, the style of handle, the length of the wood, those things can make a huge difference in how that saw operates in your hands. So again, I'm going back to physics and design of how that tool is meant to interact with you. Everyone's going to have a different personal preference, but there's some principles that are the same. The reason we like the Western style crosscut saw handle is it has a place for both hands. If you are sawing right-handed, the saw is to the right of your body. Your right hand is low on the handle, in line with the teeth, and that's your power hand. And your left hand is high on the handle as a guide hand that can also provide lift to give you an easy start and to catch the saw, and can also provide leverage. So when you're out there hands-on, where I wish we were today, and you're learning, remember those things, that handle is the connection, the lever between you and the saw. Your hands need to be on that handle. And that saw is designed to work with your body. But just as each of us are different and each saw is different, you're going to have your own favorite, and you're going to be exactly right that that's the best saw for you. When you do go to learning to saw and practicing, and I think Bob hit on it, it's a continual process. We're always learning, we're always practicing. The best way to get to be an excellent sawyer is to single buck. There's no cheating when you're single bucking. You will have to have a stance where you are balanced, where your body weight is between your 2 feet or between your foot and a knee if you're lower. And you're going to have to pull straight and push straight and develop a rhythm that works. Most of the work in crosscut sawing is changing direction. So you will do better if you can learn to push and pull smoothly, and if you can learn to use the whole length of the saw. When you're single bucking, you will most likely do those things because you will be trying to conserve energy. So your stance, your balance, your use of the whole saw, your hand placement are all critical when you are learning to saw. Beyond that, I say the saw is going to teach the sawyer, as long as you're listening, as long as you're working with that tool and not fighting with it. If you want to fight with that saw, those saws are tough. They're made of the toughest steel, and they've been around a lot longer than most of us have. And if we take care of them, they'll keep sticking around. But if we work with them and let them teach us, and listen and feel and get the feedback that that saw will give your body, you will learn to be a good sawyer. You'll have fun. You'll want to take care of the saw. You'll want to take care of the crew. And maybe you'll have as much fun with all this as I have. I sure hope so. And I hope I'll see you out on the trails.
Thanks, Dolly. That was a wonderful introduction. John's going to get ready to pull a video up, and we're going to join our physical therapist again to look at what kind of muscle groups does it take to pull a saw, not push one, but to pull one.
In this video, we have 2 sawyers using a crosscut saw. The primary action of this is a pulling and a weight shifting. And so they're using posterior deltoid in the upper arm. They're using a lot of scapula stability, so rhomboids and trapezius as they're pulling. Also, that's a biceps to pull. They're using a lot of trunk stability. You can see that their bodies don't twist very much. So that's a lot of core and spinal stability. Then down into the legs, as you can see, they are holding kind of this squat position. And so they need good hip functioning, good hip strength. That's glutes and quads and hamstrings, and also lower leg strength as well for balance and that weight shifting that occurs for this activity.
Very nice. All right, that was kind of fun to watch. I hope that's getting you warmed up for the field a little bit, even though we're all still sitting in our chairs. So we're going to transition to some talk about axes. Aaron and Jeremy, Aaron Klug with the Bob Marshall Wilderness, I guess their internet is not good today over in the wilderness, I can only imagine, in that remote area. So Jeremy's going to carry this discussion. They were going to team tag it, but I think it'll be just fine.
Hello, everyone. Thanks. Yeah, like I said, we're supposed to tag team this with Aaron. His internet out his station at Spotted Bear is poor at best, and our weather's pretty bad over here in this part of the country. So it doesn't surprise me too much. So, and then Bob too, since I don't have Aaron, feel free to chime in on this stuff. I just got my video back, by the way, so I can see everybody moving. My internet's not been behaving very well. But basically, the axe, one of the nice things about the new manual, it's called one moving part, and it really is. You're just moving one piece of metal attached to a piece of wood, and you're getting work done with it. And so the purpose of the work is to, as this slide says, is to get as much wood removed as possible with the least number of blows. And as Bob had alluded to in his opening remarks, a lot of that is trying to conserve our energy and be as efficient with our chopping as possible, and by utilizing proper technique. You can go ahead and do the next slide, please. So effective chopping requires form, strategy, and rhythm. I know according to the poll, there's a lot of beginners out there. There's a lot of people who have either no experience or limited experience. Your form, your plan of how to cut the log, or whatever you're cutting, and the rhythm that you do it in is what's going to make you become a much better, more proficient chopper, or limmer, or bucker, or using it as a tool to chop out a face cut as a companion to the crosscut saw. This is very much a companion tool to the crosscut saw in wilderness work. You can do a lot of work without this with the crosscut saw, but it's hard to pound wedges with nothing, with a rock, and it's really a bad idea. So anyway, so the three elements of successful axe blow are in order of importance: the swing, and that's the form and accuracy that you do it in; the shape of the axe. I could actually switch either of these back around, the 2 and 3, but the shape of the axe head has to do with the not only the size of it, but also the shape of your bit, or your cutting edge in your bit, and the weight to it and whatnot. And then the way that bit is then also been say ground, but I don't like grind. It is grinding, but I don't like it because I don't want people to put these axes on a bench grinder. But the shape that you shaped that head to. And then, of course, the sharpness of the bit. As we all know, a dull tool is a dangerous tool. I could swap either of those, shape and sharpness, but a lot of the shape has to do with how that chip will actually come out when you've created your series of blows. Yeah, the next slide over here. So this is a couple of Aaron's axes. One on top is a vintage high test axe. You can see those darker areas on either side. Those are actually relief cuts that he's put in after the fact to allow some of that shape, to allow that chip to pop out. The bottom one is a current Arvika 5-star axe that has kind of become, at least in this area, our go-to trail crew axe, because you can't buy those old high test anymore, but you can still buy these Arvikas, and they've got really good steel. So a lot of what we're talking about here is how to select a good axe. And this is kind of shows a couple of an older vintage axe. There's lots of good vintage axes out there. High test is an old competition pattern head from Australia or New Zealand. I can't remember now. But when you start seeing True Temper, Kelly Works, Plum, these are all good vintage axes that have good steel. Your current hardware store axes just don't cut it. So this shows you some of that profile. This is, one of the MTDC file cards up on top there, and it's on to whatever kind of axe that Aaron took a picture of this on. A lot of this information is also in the axe manual, of course, but that gives you a good idea of what the profile of an axe should look like. If it's too skinny and too thin and wedge shaped, it'll stick in the wood. If it's too fat, you won't be able to get penetration into the wood. Go ahead and do the next one. Next slide, please. So this is talking a little bit about axe handle length, and this is something that we've been doing wrong for a long time, unfortunately. Your axe handle really should basically fit into what Mr. Adam Washbeck in this modeling here shouldn't be any longer. It should be able to fit into the reach of your arm. Typically, this is probably either a 30 or maybe a 32-inch axe handle that he's hung on this head. Your typical 36-inch handle, which is kind of your standard hardware store handle, actually doesn't really fit somebody until they get to about 6'6". The longer handles on these older, those longer handles will decrease your accuracy and your power. And both of those, of course, are what we get or what we're looking for when we're looking for our proficiency with our chopping. So that's something to be aware of, that a lot of the handles that you might, or a lot of the axes that you grab out of the cache, they may not fit your body, and you might need to think about rehanging and getting some shorter or custom made handles. You can go on to the next one. So your axe handle can also be too thick. And so what Aaron is showing here in this video or this picture is a little bit of thumb overlap. And so this is showing not only do you have to hang the head and shape the head and sharpen the head properly, you also need to shape your handle to be able to fit your hand. If it is too clubby and you can't get that overlap, then you won't get a really good purchase or really good grip on your handle, and it's going to wear you out, and your accuracy is going to go down, and it's going to start wearing out your forearms and stuff as well. So there is a little bit of work to do to shaping up an axe and building an axe properly. And again, lots of this stuff, all of this stuff is covered in the extensive new axe manual, which you guys will all have access to. Go into the next one. So this is just another picture that Aaron had showing just thickness, basically overall thickness. Now, if I had great big hands like a professional wrestler or NFL tight end or something, yeah, I could probably get away with a nice thick handle like that. But for me, the one on the left there would be too thick, and the one on the right there would be a little bit better. Also, before we go to the next one, well, that's fine. As far as selecting an axe out of your cache, because I've seen some pretty terrible caches in my time, you want to make sure that axe, before you take it out, is A, sharp, but more importantly, that the head is on securely, that it's not wiggling around, that doesn't have a whole bunch of wedges, little metal wedges and everything else stuck in there, which shows that, oh, this thing probably has a loose head. The telltale sign of a bad axe, when you see all that duct tape wrapped around it, there's probably a fracture or a splinter going on in that axe or the axe handle someplace. Probably not a safe tool to be taken out in the woods. So, and sometimes we don't have a lot of choice, and so it takes time to build up your caches and get good quality products in there, get them handled correctly, teach all your crews and all your people how to do this work as well. So this is not a field class, but these are a couple ideas at least to pass along about the efficiency of chopping. The 45-degree angle versus whatever that beaver was doing over there on the right-hand side. The 45-degree angle basically is what's going to allow you to get as much penetration as you can into that piece of wood without either coming down and compressing the fibers of that log, or coming in too shallow and possibly glancing off and not sticking that axe into that piece of wood. And then the general thumb when chopping like this from one side is that you're going to need to start your cuts twice the diameter of your log that you're cutting, and then you'll come down. You can always start a little bit less and then widen it out over time, but when you get down to that bottom, to be able to get a clean break at the bottom, you'll need to overall be twice the diameter. That one on the right, it just looks painful. You can go to the next one. So here's Mr. Washback again, talking about the first kind of axe blow that we use. So this is the overhead chop, and as you can see with the diagrams there, he's coming directly over his body and directly down into the log. This is the most, and he's using his body to position that angle. So he's swinging straight over his head. You kind of aim with your belly button or your belt buckle or whatever at where you want to hit. You're coming down in a series of blows. Again, there's diagrams. This is all in the axe manual, but this is that overhead chop. This doesn't work really good once you get logs up above your knees, because you end up not being able to come on. See, he's kind of chopping on the back side of this log on this one. You can't really do that when that log is up in the air, because you end up coming straight down on the log and it's compressing the fibers again. So logs that are low to the ground, this is the more powerful, the more accurate blow to be using. Now the other one, next slide, is the over-the-shoulder chop, and he's doing this one on a log that's lower, but this one you end up using a lot with a lot of the stuff we run into doing trail work and clearing trails. You know, all of our logs aren't the perfect log laying, you know, down on the ground right where it's really convenient to get. So the over-the-shoulder chop, on this one, he's actually switching hands. So on that first one, on the overhead chop, he is using his same whichever the dominant stroke is, right hand or left hand, he's using that one for both sides. This one, you have to switch hands, and you're kind of going over the shoulder to manufacture that 45-degree angle. And so as the taller that log gets, the more on top of that log he's going to be chopping. And so it's not quite as powerful, and it takes a little bit more, you know, technique, I guess, or a little more aim. But it's still something we have to do because not all of our logs are competition logs.
Great job improvising without Aaron. That was awesome. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the field with our physical therapist, Jessica, and look at the body dynamics involved when you actually swing that axe. So
this involves a lot of hand and grip function and shoulder and trunk strength. As you can see, he's getting a rotation, and every time he lifts, he has to extend his arms with deltoids, lats to pull down, trunk extensors, also using a lot of glute and hamstring to work hip flexion. In this section here, you can see that he stands up on the log, and this is a common practice, which would obviously involve a lot of balance. And in this next video, you can see he's kind of maneuvering around branches. And so again, balance is important. As you can see here, he's going more central, but that shows a need for core strength, both back extensors and trunk flexors, being the abs.
Welcome again to the Wilderness Skills Institute. My name is Susan Jenkins, and I'm here today to present a pre-recorded presentation on rigging applications for the wilderness setting. The use of traditional tools and skills, including rigging, is very much a part of our stewardship of our wildlands, allowing us to complete needed administrative actions while meeting the intent of the Wilderness Act. The use of traditional skills also allows us to honor and preserve skills that are rapidly disappearing in an age where mechanized, motorized, and digital equipment are the norm. Riggers and rigging not only help facilitate work in wilderness, but also perpetuate logging and other construction skills that not many people have today. This short PowerPoint is not intended to provide guidance on specific rigging techniques, nor is it a substitute for proper training in order to use rigging. The intent of this presentation is to show examples of how this skill has been successfully used in the wilderness setting. So what is rigging? Rigging is the thoughtful use of specialized tools to move heavy objects safely from one location to another without putting stress on your body. It can be used for simple repetitive work, such as moving buckets of material from one point to another. And rigging can also be used to lift and set rocks that we use in constructed trail features, such as causeways and fords. Rigging is also used in more complex scenarios that require planning and the use of mechanical advantage techniques. Systems such as high leads and skylines are often used to move large timbers and boulders, as well as move and set bridges. So, what are some real-life examples that demonstrate the use of rigging as a traditional skill in the wilderness setting? In the following slides, we'll look at rigging projects from both Region 8 and Region 1. But these scenarios presented could easily take place in many other parts of the country. The photos and narratives come from individuals that have worked on these projects, as well as information that was shared on Wilderness Connect. Following a series of hurricanes in 2004, trails and canoe runs in Florida's national forests were heavily damaged and blown in with debris, leaving them inaccessible to forest visitors. While the forest and its partners worked diligently to quickly reopen trails and recreation areas outside of wilderness, Managers for the Juniper Prairie Wilderness wanted a thoughtful approach for dealing with the blowdown, focusing on methods that were more appropriate for the setting. The National Forest in Florida requested assistance from wilderness and trails experts throughout the agency. An assessment team was assembled to determine the best and most sensitive approach to reopening trails, as well as the canoe runs. Opening a canoe run comes with its own unique challenges, but what the assessment team was able to determine was that with the right skill set, in this case using simple rigging and climbing techniques, most debris could be lifted easily and removed in whole sections from the water. While there were still plenty of instances where the sawing took place in and under the water, the use of rigging expedited the overall work. Along with opening trails and canoe runs in the Juniper Prairie Wilderness, trail and wilderness crews also spent time using rigging to remove debris from cultural sites. Though not pictured, crews used skyline techniques to lift and move debris shown here before moving it to the ground and bucking it up. Not all rigging projects in wilderness are related to trails work or trails construction. Rigging has also been used in other unique circumstances, such as repairing or removing dams that are in wilderness. In 2004, the Bitterroot National Forest elected to use traditional skills to complete work on the Canyon Lake Dam, located in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. Owing to age, a growing population below the dam outside of the wilderness, and strict safety regulations, the owner of the dam was required to either provide significant upgrades or construct a partial breach to the structure. Forest Service engineers and rigging experts worked closely with the owner of the dam to devise a plan to construct a partial breach. To do this, skylines were used to move rock that weighed as much as 2,000 to 3,000 pounds. All of this work was done under the supervision of rigging experts and engineers, using the Montana Conservation Corps to completely and efficiently do the work. In 2017, Forest Service personnel discovered that a tower cap on the Bear Creek Trail Bridge was crushed, raising safety concerns regarding the structure. This is a bridge located deep within the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness and not easily accessible. The actual work to replace the cap took a great deal of planning, from assessing structural needs for the bridge to preliminary site visits to determine the kind of rigging design that would best remove the damaged portions of the bridge and replace it with a new cap. Along with the engineering and rigging concerns, planning the logistics for bringing in the rigging equipment and crews to complete the work was intensive. After flying to Sheer Airstrip, located several miles from the work site, equipment was brought in by pack stock over a period of 5 days. Larger segments of the bridge cap that could not be brought in with animals was floated down on rafts by 2 river rangers. The lead rigger for the project used a live skyline with a trolley block to move beams off the main structure and to facilitate moving the new beams in. In order to safely implement this project, the lead rigger employed a crew that included wilderness and trail crew personnel, engineers, wilderness first responders, and 2 climbers. Before implementing this project, fall protection measures and overall safety plans were approved by the Forest Safety Officer. Rigging is a fun and fascinating way to accomplish work when it comes to solving heavy lifting needs for projects, but there are many considerations to take into account when using these skills. Rigging projects need a well thought out approach and often a lot of logistical planning before they can be implemented. When problem solving for a project or a potential project, conceptualize all possible methods and techniques that may be available to you to accomplish the work. If there are less complex or simpler ways to do it, consider those first before engaging with the rigging design or application. Designing and using rigging systems involves a lot of collaboration with the right people. Depending on the scope and the scale of your project, this often means engagement with other riggers, wilderness and trail specialists, packers, engineers, qualified tree climbers, safety personnel, and others to make a sound rigging plan come together successfully. Finally, becoming a successful rigger means understanding the complexity of forces at work when designing and implementing any rigging system, no matter how simple it may seem at the onset. These are skills that take time to understand and develop, and sometimes it takes many, many years to become proficient. Never attempt to implement a project without a full understanding of how to develop or design a rigging set for the intended work.
I'm going to go ahead and introduce Doug Hunt. Doug has retired from the Forest Service, was long string, long time packer in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. He's going to talk to us a little bit about, now that we've seen crosscuts, especially some of those really long ones Dolly had, and axes and all the rigging cables and trolleys, and thinking about packing explosives, is what does it take to pack traditional tools?
Okay, I'm going to start with the safety. It's paramount for the workers and also the stock. And that's, you need to take about the same amount of caution in each. I'm assuming that most of you, I'm just going to assume that most of you are starting out on the job. The mules maybe have not been on the trail yet. So they need some time to get used to it. Hopefully you have experienced stock. Maybe some of them aren't so experienced. And what's going to happen is with your crosscut saws, your axes, you're moving these long items up over their head, over their back, bringing the saws and everything out, the axes. And the saws are probably the most critical thing. Those are, as you know, those can be extremely dangerous. What we did, and I think what most of the Forest Service does, we use a piece of fire hose and we cut it and slip it over the teeth. So if it's a 5-foot saw, you have a 5-foot piece of hose. There are hoses that are rubber lined and some of them that aren't. I prefer the rubber lined one. It gives you just a little bit more safety. So if you don't have those, you can get the fire hose, slice it and to the proper length, maybe a little bit longer than the teeth itself, because as you bend the saw, it's actually going to shorten the hose a little bit. So make it out to the handles. You can sew nylon webbing on a 6-foot saw. You might probably maybe have 5 of the straps on there that are nylon straps that are sewn on the fire hose, and they're probably 20 inches, 24 inches, and you can, and there's also Velcro on each end. So you wrap it around the saw and then Velcro it to it, so it's a good, safe shroud on it. And then on your, I've always just packed deckers and mainly manied loads. So the loads are a little bit higher. And so when you throw the saw over the load, what you do is you take we used a piece of 1/4-inch manila rope, put it over the handle, tied to one of the small decker rings on the saddle, and then came over to the other side and bent it over and tied it to the other decker ring. You would come through the decker ring, around the handle, back down to the decker ring, around the handle again, and then do a 1/2 inch down at the ring. And so you needed 2 or 3 wraps around that handle. And then you also used a piece of 1/4-inch in the rings between not the rings, but the hoops you would tie. And I just missed a step. When you throw that, put that saw on there, the teeth go back to the back. And then the 1/4-inch between the hoops, tie it off on the front one and go around the saddle and the ring and back around the saw, and then tie it to the back. So you're actually making a couple of loops around the saw down to the back ring. And you need to, if these are the first trips for these mules, you got to understand, the safety is paramount, because they may not like these saws, whipping around their head. I shouldn't say whipping, because you're very careful. You're not throwing these things on there. You're studying on them gentle, but they may react to that. And you need to be aware of that. You need to move slow and get your animals used to this. This old adage of where you have a safe area on the animal up towards the front shoulder and the back. These mules are pretty catty with their feet. And if you're really not safe there, because all they have to do is take 1 step forward or 1 hop forward, and they can get you with a hind foot. So you need to be careful there. And all these tools are extremely sharp and very dangerous to you and to the stock. Your axes, pickmatics and everything like that, we used to put them in a box. We had boxes that were about 34 inches high, and they were probably 16 to 17 inches wide. They were made out of 1/4 inch reinforced. We would oftentimes mani the box up, but only mani 2/3 of the way up to where you can slide these tools in. And I'm talking about when you're cutting and running, where you're going in and you have to have access to these tools right away. So they're not wrapped up secure where you have to unmani all the time. So you can put your shovels, your pickmatics in these boxes. They're going to rattle around some. Animals need to be used to that. Then the handles will stick out the top to where you can grab them. When you put them in and take them out, just be slow and let the animal know what's coming and going. Talk to them. Your axes, again, cutting and running. If you've got a manied load, you can put the axe through the mani ropes, the half hitches on a manied load. You probably got 4 or 5 half inches starting at the bottom going up. You can put the axe in on the back side of your load going down with its sheath, or in the front, whichever one you prefer on that. Again, if it's in the front, you're not back there where their feet are, because if you're pulling it out of a mani load, you're standing closer to the hind end of the mule. And if he's it's first or second load, and you're bringing that axe out and it's above it's coming high, above their head and everything, that could spook them. Let's see. There's just a lot of, and people make a big mistake there with once you get used to the stock. You've got new animals, and you've got your old experienced animals, and people take for granted these old experienced animals like nothing's ever going to happen. And there's actually almost more accidents happen with these experienced animals than there is with the inexperienced animals, because you're more cautious with them. You're working slower, you're aware of it. Whereas your experienced animals, you think, oh, nothing's ever going to happen. Well, that's not true, because you take them for granted and you spook them. They're half asleep, and then you come up behind them and do something, and they're startled. Whereas if it was a new animal or an unknown animal, you would maybe talk to them and let them know you're there. Your rock bars, the big long rock bars, you're probably going to have to mani those up and kind of do a sling load on those above their head down the big rock bars that are 6 feet long. Again, you can take a piece of fire hose and sew up one end or rivet one end, slide it over the sharp ends, and then mani that load up lengthwise, the full 6 feet or whatever it is, and then sling it on the animal where it's at a slant, where it's up above their head, and then come back down towards their back. Explosives, it's a no-brainer. You put your caps and everything up on the front mule, your explosives go in the back, that's pretty much it. There's a lot more to it, but you guys, just keep it all safe and work around your animals. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. That was a great discussion. I think we have about 10 minutes to go to questions and answers for everybody. I'm going to look through. I see a lot of them have been answered. And so what we might do is I might pick a couple of these out and look at who answered them and share that with everybody in the group. Saw a really interesting one. So here's an interesting one for Dolly, and she's written an answer, but why don't you discuss this a little bit more, Dolly? If you have a saw that's not crescent ground, Could you file grind it to be crescent ground without ruining it? And then go ahead and take the second question, which you said, you can't find these good old saws anymore. So what do we do? Where do we find saws? Why don't you take about 2 minutes with that one, Dolly? Oh, mic's on, Dolly.
Okay, here we are.
Good job.
To the first question about the crescent ground saws. Modern saws made today are flat ground. There are some that are made in extremely high quality for racing, and they are precisely flat. And they're rolled steel, which is probably a little harder on the outside, almost as if that steel has a skin. And they have often been tensioned, which I won't go into a whole lot. But if you did take a grinder to a saw like that to apply your own crescent taper grind, you'd sort of ruin it. You'd take the life out of the metal. With old saws, the vintage saws that were flat ground are sort of the same. Metal has a life to it that I don't understand, and it ages and gets harder, and it has sort of a skin on the outside from aging. You can think of it as a weather hardening or a work hardening. And if you even clean these saws with a belt sander or some kind of grinder, you're going to ruin them, and they're not going to flex the same. They're not going to have the same life. So modern top quality saws or old saws should not be reground to try to put a crescent taper or any type of taper to them. And then the modern lesser quality saws are quite soft anyway. And I don't know what happens if you grind on them. I think they probably warp and twist. And so I wouldn't bother. But I have found that a flat ground saw that's tuned well and given a little extra set to account for that flat grind instead of a taper grind can still work quite well. So work with what you've got with these old saws. That's kind of my best advice on them. To the other question, where do you get an old saw?
Right.
It starts out being a mystery. Oh, I'll never find an old saw. But then you start looking around and they do show up. You'll have a friend, a neighbor, a grandfather, a friend's grandfather who has one. You find them on the wall. You go in your favorite restaurant and trade something for the one they've painted and hung on the wall. You go on eBay. You go on Craigslist. You go to yard sales. They're out there. There are a lot of good saws out there. There are also some websites that sell them. Bob mentioned the axhole.com. I'm sure he's still got some saws for sale. The one thing you do have to consider is that most of these little saws you find will not be in shape to take out and cut. Some people, myself included, do sell sharpened saws. I am constantly on the hunt for saws that I can restore and sharpen and sell, and then I stand behind them. When you get an old saw that's not yet sharpened, you can learn to sharpen. You can go to a workshop, you can self-teach, you can send it to someone to sharpen. And about 1 out of every 10 saws I get my hands on has some sort of flaw that makes it less valuable than I thought it was when I first saw it. That's the risk you take. But the old saws are out there, and it's up to us to collect them and treasure them and take care of them. So
Thanks, Dolly.
yeah, good luck on your searches.
So I think we've managed to answer all the questions in the box. If you put one in there, there's great answers there. Thanks to the panelists for doing that. Bob, I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to wrap up just real quick. And before we do, please don't leave us. We do have a little bit of a closing, and we do want to make sure just one more time to remind you to fill out a form if you want an axe manual, if you want the new Crosscut posters with the traditional tool posters, or the axe posters. NTDP is going to make them available to you at no charge for being in the class. So with that, Bob, do you want a minute or two, and then we'll do our wrap up?
Sure. Thank you all very much for being part of our class today. This is fun for us. I know Dolly and I go back 30 plus years, and Doug and Jeremy and the other people, They're my friends, they're my tutors, they're my mentors, and hopefully they have learned something from me over the years, just as we would learn something from you if you came out with us. This is kind of a family affair where we all work together and do this together. I think one of the things that I would like to say in closing is when you take up a traditional skill, it benefits you by what I said before, the thought process, learning the problem-solving skills. But society benefits as well. You're part of living history. You're preserving our heritage, and not just land management heritage, not just Forest Service heritage. By learning these skills, you're preserving American history. These are the skills that built America. Thank you very much for joining us. And Carol, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Well, the National Wilderness Skills Institute wants to thank all of you for being here. I can't imagine any other class you could take nationwide where you could put this group of people in the same room again that have worked on all this research and tools for over 30 years together. So your presence is very, very appreciated, Bob and Dolly, Jeremy and Doug. Thank you so much. And John, for working behind the scenes and getting all this technology to run. We know that we would all rather be in the field together doing this, but thank you for your grace and your patience as we ran through this. I think we got a lot of good information in there. And as we close, this was a conversation Bob and Dolly had, and I want to share that with you. And it says that while we were all very pleased to have modern technologies allowing us to connect virtually with you and share knowledge of traditional skills with a wonderfully large audience, we fully acknowledge that the very first and most important traditional skill is the ability to teach and to learn in person. We don't want to downplay the value of our modern formats, but we all must know that there is no substitute for teaching and learning directly from human to human, working together with skill, enthusiasm, and respect for our work and for each other. And keeping that tradition alive will carry us through the modern age with our humanity intact.